Welcome back to Mean Streets, where each week we investigate the best, worst, and forgotten movies of film noir. I'm Luke Deckard.
And I'm Matthew Booth.
And today's case is The Third Man from 1949, starring Joseph Cotten, Alida Valli, Orson Welles, and Trevor Howard. The log line for The Third Man is pulp novelist Holly Martins travels to shadowy post-war Vienna, only to find himself investigating the mysterious death of an old friend, Harry Lime. I'm super excited to talk about this episode, and we also have a very special guest with us. We have the world famous Matthew Robinson. He's a filmmaker, playwright, and line producer, according to his Twitter bio. But Matt, it's great to have you joining us for this chat on The Third Man.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited. This is one of my favorite films of all time.
Cool. I'll try not to shit on it too much. Actually, okay.
For this episode, Matthew, you are the third man, of course.
Yes.
Oh, I like that.
So
that wasn't scripted. That was just,
it was just natural goodness.
Natural flow things.
Before we kind of dive into the nitty gritty of the film, I mean, this was actually my first time watching The Third Man. It's for some reason it's just always it's one of those ones that has evaded me until now. But I'm interested to hear about both Matt and Matthew, your experience, your kind of first encounter with A Third Man, and what that was like. Should we start with Matthew? You go first.
Robinson is
yes.
Okay. Make sure. The two Matts here. I learned a lot of Matts in my life. First time I saw it, I was a teenager. It was on Turner Classic Movies. We didn't grow up with cable for most of my childhood or adolescence, but around the age 16, my parents finally bit the bullet and got it. And I think I was 17 years old. And my dad was he was always watching TCM, still watches TCM. And he's like, hey, come watch this. And I always liked film noir, but that blew me away because it was so different than most film noir that I had ever seen. I would say, that and Double Indemnity are really up there as far as film noir goes. And Double Indemnity is kind of the blueprint of film noir. But my dad introducing to me to Third Man was this takes the tropes that from film noir and it kind of puts a little subversion on them. And I just was so fascinated by it. And I just was locked into that TV, just this is so freaking cool. And so I've loved the movie ever since.
Similar experience, really. I came to this fairly late because most of the films we talked about, I sort of came to when I was a teenager. I didn't see this, I don't think, until I was in my sort of early 20s. But the first I knew about it was the theme tune, the Zither theme tune, which I'd heard people humming and singing and what have you, and calling it the Third Man theme. And I thought, what the hell does that mean? And then a bit like Matthew, I saw it on TV and I thought, oh, is this it? And I remember asking my dad if he knew anything about it, because my dad was quite knowledgeable about this sort of stuff. And he said, yeah. He said, this is that famous music, and started to sing it. And I said, oh, right, great. So I put it on, and I came to it not knowing what to expect. I knew it was a film noir. I knew Orson Welles was in it, but I didn't know anything about the story. What I got was, I think it's fair to say, not really what I was expecting. Because at that age, film noir to me then meant private eyes in offices and innocent men on the run and things like that. And what I got was something quite different and surprisingly good. I don't mean that to sound sort of patronizing to the film. I mean surprisingly different, in a very pleasing way.
It was something that fascinated me was I found out that the book didn't come first.
Right.
So Graham Greene is the writer. He's a famous kind of noirish writer from back in the day. But yeah, I was fascinated to learn that to kind of get the character and atmosphere and all that kind of stuff, he wrote the story first as a novella, but he was writing it for the screenplay. So he wrote the novella to write the screenplay and had no intention of publishing it as a novel. I don't know, I'm a novelist and I've also done scripts, but I've never thought to write something in a different form to sort of, I don't know, get those things that you want, that particular kind of flavor or color. I don't know if you guys ever do anything like that with your creative endeavors, like find a different sort of style of approaching?
Yeah. I mean, there's a screenplay that I want to write and direct that was originally written as a short story, entered into a short story contest. And so if you like, if you go back to always writing a short story, I've been working on the script and the short story since like 2018. But it's kind of like, it's different. I mean, it's very Michael Crichton. It's a very Michael Crichton thing to do, to kind of like, I'm going to write this so that we can say it's based off of an IP, and then we're going to make it a movie.
Right.
It's it's a smart thing to do, though. I think more writers should actually do it. I know it's two very different styles. I like to write prose as well as screenplays and even poetry. And it's very, very different, very, very different. But I do think as a screenwriter, it's easier for me to take a short story or a novel or novella and just kind of put it into a script, because it's basically just removing all of the inner pathos out of the lines. It's just like, well, just the dialogue now, I guess, and then the director will figure out how to convey what they're actually feeling.
Yeah, I have done it. I've done it as well. I used to write for radio, and like Matthew says, I've taken old radio scripts because I had a deadline for a couple of short stories I was doing for an anthology, and I thought, well, I'll just do them, just convert those into short story format. But I found that I don't know if this is more about my radio script writing dialogue or not, but I found that doing it on the page in prose, some of the stuff I'd written for someone to say out loud didn't really feel right, so I changed some of the dialogue in the short story format. So it is a very different beast. It's a very different beast. But I also, like you, Luke, I didn't know that Green had done this as a sort of dress rehearsal for the script.
I also liked that Green, not necessarily, I don't know if it was actually particularly for this project, but he had been to Vienna and toured the city and got a flavor of it. And I did feel like the film, I think, does really well to capture sort of war-torn Vienna. I think that's one of its big strengths for me, at least. So let's talk about the way the film was shot. There's so many like oblique angles. Everything is just sort of tilted and off. And see, I really wasn't expecting that, but I liked it because I like the way the film opens with that sort of narration of the black market and all that kind of the seediness that's going on. And so from the very beginning, you kind of get the picture that this place is like, it's dark and it's dangerous and it's nefarious. And all of that is emphasized by the fact that so many frames are uneven and off kilter and leaves you unsettled. What are your thoughts? What are you guys' thoughts on how they sort of do that with this?
I think it's beautiful. I mean, I think it's like using those Dutch angles kind of really makes you never feel like you're at home. It really puts you into kind of Holly Martin's viewpoint. Nothing is familiar, and even the score, obviously. I mean, it's a beautiful score, but it's also not a score that's used, definitely not in film noir, and not really in movies in general. I mean, a zither score would be almost out of place, even in a little romantic kind of farce. And so hearing that, you just kind of feel like, I don't belong here. I shouldn't be here. This place is weird. It's a movie, I like to tell people, it can never be remade. It can never be shot because they literally shot on the ruins of World War II Vienna. You'll never get a set design that good. It's like one of the equivalents is, it might seem like a reach at first, but stay with me. It's like Wes Craven's New Nightmare, shot right after the Northridge earthquake in Los Angeles, and they worked that into the script that like Freddy Krueger was causing earthquakes in the real world, just because they're like, well, we can't hide that there's just earthquake damage everywhere, so let's lean into it. Same thing kind of with The Third Man. And I think these kind of like Dutch and like canted angles really create the atmosphere that honestly would not work.
Building off that point of like just sort of in a place that's unfamiliar and odd. I also, at least with my copy of the film, there's no subtitles when people are speaking, and you really sort of feel like you're with Holly in that he's always asking other people, what did they say? What did she say? What did he say? And you kind of as the audience, you can kind of guess what's being said because this just the way the nature of the acting is, you can kind of get an idea. Like when they come to when Holly and Anna are going back towards her house and the police are there, you can quickly piece together the lady is saying that the police are up there, but he doesn't get it. And I like that sort of feeling of, the audience, is also out of the equation. You're not necessarily in on what's going on and what's being said. It's very disconcerting because it's like you're lost in this. You really feel lost in a foreign country, and you feel that frustration for Holly as he wants information, but isn't able to get it almost anywhere he goes.
And he gets no assistance from anybody. The police don't like him on sight. Trevor Howard hates him almost immediately. Wherever he makes contact with somebody, there is some sort of antagonistic relationship going on, and he's batted back at each moment. And all he really wants to do is find out where his old mate is. It's something that we perhaps might all do if we were that way inclined. But the way it's shot, I agree with Matthew. All the Dutch angles are so disorientating because it's not really what you're expecting and what you think you should be seeing, that it puts you in Holly's place. That's exactly what it does. And the lack of subtitles, I think, is a great touch.
I think, again, like this was, I feel like this must have been at a time where the Dutch angles weren't super popular because apparently one of Carol Reed's friends sent him a level and says, next time you make a film, put this on top of the camera.
Put this on top.
So that things can be like, things can be level, but it's interesting that that sort of was some of the response to the way that looked. I'm kind of surprised that people didn't get that, or like, the friend, his friend didn't clock what was going on with that.
Yeah, because that's definitely the effect he's going for. He's going for that unsettling, and it's not just in the Dutch angles, it's in the lighting as well, I think, because it's like an expressionist, a whole fantasy, this film, because even the faces are distorted by lenses at some at various points, so that they don't look familiar either. And there's a bit where the lights are sort of the frame is shot and lit in such a way that it's like carrying balloons or something, and his shadow is huge on the side of the wall, and everything is there to disorientate you and to make things not as they appear something else from what they actually are.
Yeah.
Because this is, after all, a mystery film.
Yes.
So it's trying to sort of throw your attention somewhere else and away from the truth. So all those things come together for me. To give an absolute cinematic experience as a whole.
I think one of the really cool things at the beginning that I liked was the introduction of Calloway, the head police guy. And because when you see him at the funeral, he's wearing this like shiny black leather coat. He looks like he should be the villain. You see him and you're like, oh, that guy is, don't trust that guy. And then of course you end up learning that that's not the case at all. But I like that kind of visual trickery that the film does to sort of make you think, oh, this guy is your villain, stay away. And then, what was your guys' impression when you first met Calloway?
Very similar to you. Like, you think that he's going to be maybe not the main antagonist, but you think he's certainly going to be a major obstacle in the hero's way. Like, you think he's going to be someone who's like constantly on the run, maybe like mistaken identity. You just think Calloway is going to be someone who's going to be constantly a thorn in his side. And I do think, in a sense, he's kind of the person who's forcing Holly to actually reckon with what's going on. But he's not an obstacle. He's almost the kind of good angel on the shoulder. And I think that's cool. Because it's not, like, again, it's another subversion. It's not what you are expecting of this character. And that makes him so much more compelling because he's got a charisma about him, but you also understand that how he's irritating both Holly and Anna in some way.
What do we make of the character of Holly Martin in general?
I think he's interesting in the sense that he's not one of these film noir protagonists who is in control, is he? He's very rarely in control. He's pulled from pillar to post, and he's very much he's a patsy to more than one person, as far as I can see. Including Calloway, because Calloway manipulates him as much as anybody else does. And I don't. He clearly is a fish out of water and doesn't really know what he's doing. And all he is a pulp fiction writer who doesn't know any better than the westerns that he writes. That's the impression and is obviously too fond of the source. That's always the impression that I've got of him. But he then does develop that sense of integrity, and he does say, to himself, well, something's got to be done. But I don't think it's until sort of the final scenes that he really comes into his own, as it were, and realizes that he's got to do something pretty significant for a man that he still considers a friend at the end of everything, in the final confrontation in the sewers. But until then, I think he's played by almost everybody. It reminds, in a way, he reminds me a little bit of Rick in Casablanca, in the sense that, he's left sort of stranded at the end. He's mixed up in all this when he doesn't really want to be, and he's not fully in command of his own sort of destiny. It was only today watching it in preparation for this that I thought there is a bit of Rick Blaine in this character somewhere if you look for it. And they're both heavy drinkers, of course. It's just that Holly seems to want to sort of deny that he is.
It's funny you draw the Casablanca comparison, because I also feel like he's like kind of a prototype for Jack Nicholson's character in Chinatown. I think Jack Nicholson's character, I think he's a little bit more capable than Holly, but yes. Holly is someone who is like, he's really in over his head, and he's aggressively pushing towards the center of this thing, not really knowing, and getting other people hurt and killed in the process, by the way. I mean, he's not a good private eye. I mean, he's not at all. But obviously he does find his moral center and compass eventually, but he's kind of bumbling. I think he bumbles with some flair. I think he's got, that kind of old-timey mid-Atlantic charm that kind of smooths a little bit of his shortcomings over. But like, if you imagine this guy was like talking like, I don't know, some fast talker like Brooklynite, everyone would be like, this doofus doesn't know what he's doing. Get him out of Vienna.
That's why I like the running joke of Bernard Lee's sergeant constantly saying how good a writer he is. Because he's rubbish at everything else.
I think what fascinated me a little bit about him is the scene that kind of stands out in my mind is that scene in Lime's house where he's speaking with the porter. And the porter's like, oh, I didn't give evidence, I don't want to get mixed up and all that kind of stuff. And he's very adamant, like he says, make it your business. You need to sort this stuff out. Like, this is ridiculous. You haven't done anything. You haven't even spoken to the police. Like, what the heck is wrong with you, man? It very much reminded me of Henry James's The American. It's an old modernist novel about an American, typical American going to Europe and kind of charging in with his American gusto and wanting things, wanting to be respected and heard and demand things with his Americanness. And I quite liked that this film was in a way sort of toying with that you have this kind of this, he's not I wouldn't call Hawley like a tough guy, but he's being an abrasive American in many respects. He's pushing his agenda in that Americans tend to do when they come to Europe. And I like that he's sort of pushing against those sorts of norms where it's in European society you sort of know your place, your position in class, you kind of keep your head down, you just let whatever needs to happen will happen, and you don't want to get involved in stuff. So that was to me something I really quite enjoyed, and to another extent I sort of would have liked to have seen maybe a little bit more of that come out throughout the story, because it's sort of there in that one scene, and then it sort of fades away a little bit, and we don't see it it as much. But I think the film maybe missed a trick by not emphasizing that just a little bit more in a couple other places, whether that was like Calloway making reference to, like, if he made reference to, like, cowboy antics, you might be writing you might be writing cowboy fiction, but this isn't the Wild West.
Yeah.
And yeah, so maybe just, you don't, not that you want to like hammer it in like too obvious, but I just think something a little bit more could have been said. Well, this isn't America, so this isn't how we play things. Something like that, I think could have gone a long way.
No, I think you're making sense. I mean, he's kind of on a quixotic quest with this. I mean, because really, his interest in the third man and who didn't obviously kill Harry Lime, it's rooted in, of course, this sort of bravado, like you said, machismo, but it's also just a kind of common curiosity. It's almost a tourist trip for him in some ways. He kind of treats it with this, like, everyone should kind of move out of the way from me. And of course, I mean, I think that's why the ending is so perfect, because he really thinks that he's the hero of the story. And he's like, you're just the protagonist. You're not really the hero. Calloway is more of a hero than you are.
Yes.
And he really like just completely eviscerates this community. Obviously, Harry Lime was doing his part in more ways than one, in a much more malicious and evil way. But he leaves a wake of lives in his quest for this truth that he's not even really willing to reckon with once he discovers it.
I agree with that. And he seems to have this sort of, I agree with you, he wreaks havoc in this community. That is absolutely true. And doesn't seem to notice that he's doing it all the time that he is doing it. And he seems to have this complete conviction that what he thinks and what he does is right. And it takes Calloway to show him the effects of the diluted whatever it is.
Penicillin.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
And say, look, this is what he does. Because up until that point, he's still like, well, this is my best mate. He's not responsible for any of this. He's the victim. He's the one that has been killed, and he needs justice. And it takes that real sort of kick between the legs, as it were, to break him out of his own sort of self-assurance. And his absolute conceited view that he is right about everything, that his the way he sees events is the true one and the correct one. It's only after sort of a real shock to his system that he dismantles that arrogance, I suppose is the word. But as Matthew said, by the time he realizes that and he learns that lesson, there's a whole trail of destruction behind him.
Well, I mean, Calloway says it best. He's like, "Leave death to the professionals," which is a fantastic line. Fantastic line. But it's also true. I think that one of the fun things that the film does on a subversive level is that in sort of noir fiction, sometimes you just have the random individual who gets wrapped up in a mystery, and then they become the hero and they solve it or they address it or something like that. And with this, you kind of you get the everyman. Holly is the everyman, but he sucks because he is the everyman. He's not equipped to deal with this stuff in the real world, and that's why I like the headbutting between him and Calloway throughout the movie, because you're not getting. Yeah. You very quickly realize that Calloway isn't the villain, even though he's set up at the beginning to look and feel like a villain. You then realize, oh no, he's just talking sense, and I get it. I'm surprised they didn't do more to eject Holly from Vienna. Like physically throw him onto a plane and say, "Get the heck out of here." Yeah. You're screwing up everything.
I agree with all that, Luke. Yeah, I mean, why don't they just deport him quickly? But, I think this is why, of course, he's a writer of fiction. He's in command of his own fiction, and it's important that he writes westerns where typically, the good guys win, and they win on their own terms, and he thinks he is one. That's what it seems to me. But out in the cold post-war real world, he's a doofus, as Matthew says, and he hasn't got the moral fiber or the courage, whatever it is, to do what somebody like Roger Thornhill in North by Northwest does, who is also a selfish, arrogant everyman, but who, when he comes to realize what it's all about, does step up, and he does do what's necessary. But Holly ain't got any of that, has he?
No.
He's as far away from that as it's possible to get, which I think is a fascinating choice for your protagonist to be, because how many of us would?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, and I think that's why you still sympathize with Holly. You don't, and I never like hate him. He does some things I dislike, but he's still someone who's interesting and fun. And I know his intentions ultimately are good. It's just frustrating to watch as an audience member.
There are many things that I like about Holly and those sorts of little moments. I think because you mentioned Rick from Casablanca, and I really like the problem that I sort of have with Holly though is ultimately he's kind of, while on one level there is some interest there, but on another level I find him sort of dull. I don't find him frustrating or anything like that, because I like the fish out of water stuff. I like the idea of just someone trying to take charge and solve his friend's murder like that. That's all fine. But there's I think I don't know if it's the actor. I don't know if it's Joseph Cotten. I don't know what it is, but there's something for me that was just ever so slightly missing there. That sort of Dick Powell Bogart charm that I kind of, Robert Mitchum, that thing, that spark. I wasn't getting the spark from him as a noir protagonist. I don't know. Do you guys, am I wrong? Am I the odd man out in this? Which is fine if I am.
I don't think that your opinion on that is wrong. I mean, I didn't find him dull. Maybe that's not the word I would use, but I do understand where you're coming from in terms of, like, he is kind of like a stick in the mud to a certain degree. He's not the most fun person to watch. There's a much more, maybe not better film, but a certainly more interesting film if you had Anna be the one who's maybe trying to hunt this person down, or we saw everything from Calloway's perspective. Yeah. There's maybe something a little bit more interesting in the perspective there, but it's not. I totally get what you mean. He is kind of like, he's in the pantheon of film noir heroes. No one really brings up Holly Martin as like, look at this guy.
No, absolutely.
Something else that was interesting about this movie is the way that sort of Holly was able to keep himself in Vienna was to get some work, potentially writing some propaganda for this guy in the movie. And I say guy because I don't remember his name. He's barely in the movie. And something that kind of stood out to me was, at no point did Holly write any propaganda for this guy. At no point did he do any actual work for him. He just turned up to one literary event that tanked, which was funny, by the way. But like, he didn't do any work. I thought, how is he staying here to do some work if this guy, like, what happened to that section of the story? What happened?
Matthew, any ideas? Because I've got none.
No, honestly, I forgot about that detail until I rewatched it a few nights ago. I've seen the movie probably at least 10 or 12 times, and I always forget about that detail of the story, because you're right. I mean, it has a really funny scene, but it's so inconsequential to the rest of the movie. So no, I honestly, I was like looking at my notes and like, I have nothing on that. I'm just like, oh yeah, this is like, it's like, I look at my notes right now and it's just saying like, yeah, it's like, it's just not even think about that scene. I don't know. It's, what a sweet gig though, not to have to work.
Is it,
right?
I mean, this might be a stretch, but the actor's called Wilfred Hyde White, I think, and he was in a lot. He was for this period and before, a little bit after, he was the like quintessential English gentleman. Is it like a nod to the 39 Steps? Where he has to give that impromptu political candidate speech, and the enemy agents are watching him.
Oh, interesting.
Do you know what I mean? Or is that just a stretch too far? Because if it is meant to do that, it doesn't do anything near what the 39 Steps does with it.
No.
It's a point in the 39 Steps. It's another predicament for Hannay to get out of, using his wits. But in this, it isn't. And I don't know whether that's just I don't know if there was meant to be something that followed on from it, that there was a payoff to come that was edited out or whatever, or if it is just a bit of padding. But that's the only thing that occurs to me whenever I see this film, that it's some sort of half-baked nod to Hitchcock's 39 Steps film.
Yeah.
And indeed the book. But I don't see what it's trying to achieve if it is that, which is the only thing that gives me pause.
Yeah, you're right. That's a good point.
I'm not sure. It's weird because like the only scene that connects to the propaganda guy is that dud of a literary event where they're asking him about questions, who's the best writer, who's this and that, and that's fun and funny. It did feel a little bit out of place, and it felt like it felt like they needed an excuse to have him cornered so that the second man, who was there with, when Lime supposedly was killed, can corner him and chase him, which, I mean, the chase was really fun. I liked the chase that followed. It was really cool. I mean, creepy I thought it was very creepy, the fact that he like hid in this burnt out, bombed car. Very sort of like, what I liked about that was it was really showing and this is kind of like we said earlier, that it's showing that war-torn Vienna that sort of almost like felt very Mad Max post-apocalyptic a little bit in the way that the city is being portrayed. Even at the end of that chase and at the end of that whole sort of segment, you're sort of left with this like question of, why did that just happen?
I mean, they could have cornered him anywhere, couldn't they? They could have cornered him in an alleyway. They could have jumped him. Yeah. They could have, I mean, knowing Holly, they could have got him in a bar.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That if the purpose is the chase, then the setup to that chase could be done in 100 different ways. The three of us could come up with, in 2 minutes sitting, from the top of our heads, I suspect.
Yeah.
So it is an odd scene, and it's one of those scenes that if you really think about it, if you cut that, does the film lose much apart from a chase scene? I don't think it does.
It doesn't, because that gangster, that guy who I'm assuming is a gangster because he runs that little bar and he seems a bit seedy. He doesn't come back.
No. Right.
After the chase scene, that was the other sort of like problems that I had. I was like, wait a minute. Like, where'd that guy go? The propaganda guy's now pointless. The second man involved in the crime is now gone. Like, what is going on with this movie? What's going on?
So from a writing point of view, is it the dreaded word padding? Is that all it is? Is it just stretching out this runtime from what would be, I don't know, an hour and 30 to an hour and whatever it is, 40?
Could be. It could be. Because he also is a novelist now writing a screenplay. So it's like, in a novel, you can kind of meander a bit more, have some kind of more inconsequential scenes. But in this, screenplay, it's more like everything you see is meaningful. And here maybe it's kind of like a little red herring-ish a little bit, but it is true. It was something I noticed. I was like, oh yeah, that never really goes anywhere. Yeah. It's exciting and it's intriguing, but it all it makes you know is that like Vienna's not as safe as maybe he thought it was. But I think that's really all it really accomplishes ultimately.
Yes. It makes me wonder if the thing that made this movie such a hit was the combination of the style, the way that it looked and was shot, and it is very well acted. I mean, the characters when they're on screen mostly pop. Holly is the one who doesn't pop for me, but like Baron Kurtz, so creepy.
Yeah.
When he first was introduced, I thought, oh man, this guy's uneasy presence. I mean, he's a little bit freaky. This guy's gonna go somewhere. He doesn't, but he was. But when he's there, I was like, okay, that's cool. I'm intrigued to see where this goes. Even when we finally find Lime or see Lime alive for the first time. I mean, that scene, that light that flashes on and that zoom in, that's smirk that he gives is just like That's magical. That's like cinematic magic right there. So there's all these things that I think are happening in this movie that are making it sort of work and be captivating. But when I evaluate it with my critical eyes, I'm like, it's like I don't want it's not nowhere near as like on the level of like a popcorn like Marvel movie bad. It's just lacking on the narrative. You've got a whole heap of other things, but the plate doesn't have very much when it comes to the narrative, I guess.
I get what you're saying here, and I said this to someone. It's like I would probably put Third Man firmly in my top 5 favorite movies of all time. Like that's probably, if I ever get lucky enough to get interviewed on the red carpet for Letterboxd, that's probably going in there. This or Double Indemnity, but yeah. I do know what you mean. It is narratively, it's a pretty straightforward mystery once the mystery really gets going. There's not like a lot of like surprises or anything. It's not a DOA or Kansas City Confidential or a Maltese Falcon in that sense. This is really more a morality story with very interesting characters. You could almost do this as a play, almost. Obviously, you lose a lot of the visual style. Depending on your opinion, you might call this blasphemous. I say this as a Bay head, but this is, Carol Reed he's kind of doing the Michael Bay thing here for his time. He is doing like a different editing style, a different music style, a different camera style. And like for us, it seems like still very like proper and classic and everything. But at the time, like you mentioned before, the guy who was like, what are you doing these Dutch angles everywhere? I mean, like this was like for them, this was like their Bad Boys too. You know what I'm saying? Like they were like, what is happening? These guys aren't even good heroes.
And it worked to a certain extent because the theme tune was, I think it was the biggest selling hit in 1950.
Right.
It was huge.
It just blew up that into, and I even found myself in the little quieter moments after the film had finished, thinking to myself, stop singing that tune. Go around in your head all the time. But I know what you mean. But I know what you're saying, Luke, certainly. But devil's advocate is some film noir always a little bit sort of style over substance on occasion.
Oh no,
I think this is certainly
can
a stylish film. This is certainly a stylish film.
Yeah, it definitely can be. But I think my when it comes to like my favorites, it's where the style and the substance are both there in equal measures. You know what I mean? Like for example, Out of the Past. Like that to me is like, that's got the style, but it's got the substance, and it just like effing cooks. Like that to me is like bah. And this isn't in no way am I calling this a bad film. This is definitely not a bad film, but it's just in the pantheon of noir. It's interesting because people have said that this is like the best. It is a masterpiece, and there's all this talk about it being like the best of the best, and I'm like, I think on the technical side it shines brightly. But I think I doesn't like the way it's shot and stuff like that. But I think it's that story side that I'm like, it wasn't quite there. It needed a couple more, another draft or two, and you would have had almost perfection. But
I wonder if some of that is to do with the fact that he treated it as a screenplay first, because a year before this, I think.
Well, novella first. He treated it as a novella.
A novella, yeah. I think before this, there was Brighton Rock. The year before, there was Brighton Rock.
Yes.
Which is one of the best British noirs of all time, and that has certainly got style and substance and narrative drive. Yeah. But of course, it's adapted from his novel, from Green's novel, and I wonder if some of the blame, for want of a better word, lies there, that he'd not put as much time and effort into the prose version of it as he might have done otherwise, simply because he wanted to turn it into a screenplay. It might be something like that, and maybe he gets caught up in the fact that you've got to have action in a film and all this business, and it doesn't really matter what the narrative tissue is in between. Yes, I think it does, but for me, I know why you're saying it, Luke, and it's absolutely valid. But I do get lost in the style of it. I have to say,
Yeah.
Those things that we're sort of criticizing now are the things that you think after the credits have rolled and a couple of hours have passed, and you think, well, hang on. Why was he with Wilfred Hyde White? What was all that about? But by then you think, who cares?
I mean, I was asking the questions in the moment. I was watching it. I don't know, Matthew Robinson. Do you know Phil Dragish?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So him and I, we watched the movie last night. So like we were commenting the whole way through. So I was like, as this stuff was happening, we were like, wait, what about that? Wait, what about that? We're probably the worst people to watch a film with if people just want to sit there and watch a film quietly. But I mean, interestingly, Cary Grant was in the running, or was wanted to play the role of Holly Martins, which that makes me wonder how I would have. I mean, I love Cary Grant. He is my favorite. My favorite old timey movie is To Catch a Thief. That is, I've loved that since I was a kid, and I'm just always like, when I saw that, I was like, oh, I wonder how I would have responded to everything in general if Cary Grant was in that role.
Yeah,
because
that's a very good point.
He could have made that character pop a little more and maybe made some of that meandery stuff just make a little bit more. Not make it make more sense, but make me forget.
Yeah, I think he probably
some of that
would.
Stuff.
I think he probably would. I think you would have been, because Grant is extremely charismatic, as you know.
Yes.
And I think you would have been carried away with him as rather than concentrating on any shortcomings. Yeah. But Joseph Cotten doesn't hold you the way that Cary Grant can hold you. Apart from in Shadow of a Doubt. Hitchcock Shadow of a Doubt. He's great in that.
Yeah.
But that's a different beast to The Third Man. And I think it probably would have had a different effect on you if Cary Grant had done it,
Yeah. I think so. Possibly.
He's a lot more engaging, Grant. Grant's got much more engaging personality. It's one of the reasons I say that North by Northwest was a perfect marriage of star, director, and vehicle. Because if you take any one of those things away, it isn't as good. It's not as good. When you think James Stewart wanted to be in North by Northwest, you think, no chance, James. No chance.
Sorry, James.
So yeah, I think Cary Grant would have made a big difference, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I think likability of an actor lets you forgive some of their shortcomings as a character. I mean, I think it does play into something. As much as I think writers and directors, particularly writers, like to pretend that it doesn't, it does. And a likable star can make you travel further with an unlikable character. A recent example maybe is like Cate Blanchett in Tar. On the paper, Tar is a terrible, terrible, terrible person. But because it's Cate Blanchett, you come in with a natural sympathy for her that you wouldn't necessarily with someone who maybe always plays villains or always plays kind of unscrupulous characters. Maybe you would already be ready to hate her. So I agree with that. If you look at the pictures and anyone's sharing anything, The Third Man, it's almost always something that has a shot of Orson Welles in it because he really is the powerhouse and he's kind of the main event.
That was also something that was really intriguing to me, having not seen this movie and knowing very little about it going in, was okay, Orson Welles doesn't turn up until like I don't know the minute number, but it's very far into the movie. There's not a lot of movie left when we finally see him. And yeah, everything, like he's on the DVD cover, he's on the posters. Everyone talks about Orson Welles. You don't talk about Cotten. No one talks about Cotten. Right. And so it's like, what? Okay, this is that to me was also kind of and maybe that was also playing in my mind. It was like, wait a minute, okay, surely he's gonna be around here soon because he must be the star of the movie, given that everyone and everything is about, and he's not here. What's going on? So that is another thing where that can easily play in. It almost has that sort of that mild frustration that I had with Blade Runner 2049, and that it advertised Harrison Ford returning as Rick Deckard, which I loved Blade Runner 2049. It's one of my favorite neo-noir movies. But I think that movie would have been a bigger success if they had kept Ford out of the marketing and then just surprised the fans, and then word of mouth would have spread and people would have rushed to go see Harrison Ford returning as you know in this movie. And that's the thing with this. And I was my perception of it was that Orson Welles is a big part of this movie. I'm going into an Orson Welles movie. I'm not watching an Orson Welles movie.
No. In fact, I know several people who've watched this film, and when he turns up, they say, "Oh, I forgot he was in it."
Yeah.
You know, you get his name at the credits, in the opening credits, and then he's not there. You know, it doesn't say who he's playing, and then he's not there for. I think it's a good hour. It's over an hour, I think.
Yeah.
And of course he is sort of the whole point of the film. You know, and I think anybody else, it wouldn't have had. If they cast anybody but Welles, it wouldn't have had that impact. But yeah, I think you're right, Luke. I think if you go into this expecting an Orson Welles movie, like Touch of Evil or something like that, then you're gonna be sorely disappointed, because it's not that at all. It's quite different, and it might be that subconsciously you are sort of dismissing Joseph Cotten because you're sitting waiting for Orson Welles and he's not turned up yet. You know, it's sort of like making do with the one guest who's turned up to your party when the life and soul's not yet arrived. You know, that's the sort of way that it comes across to me. And this is billed as a Welles picture. It's famously Welles, and I think they should have had Trevor Howard in more of the marketing, because I think he has as much in his own way, as much of an impact in this film as Welles does.
Yeah. I mean, Welles is such a huge personality, I guess. And there was controversy around him and this movie of I think like apocryphal stories of him taking credit for writing a lot of the character, or writing and directing and stuff like that. To which people had to sort of reiterate over time that, like, you know, Carol Reed was definitely influenced by Wells's earlier films, but this was undoubtedly Carol Reed's movie. And you know, even like the famous the famous speech with the cuckoo clock speech in the Ferris wheel. You know, they said something about how he added a couple of lines to that scene, but even that historians have gone through and be like, well, he was probably influenced by a couple of other places in which the Swiss cuckoo clock was mentioned elsewhere.
I think several people have made that point in other forms of literature, and I always take those stories about Welles writing that speech. I'd take with the same amount of salt as I'd take the what's given us fact that Robert Shaw wrote the Indianapolis speech in Jaws, and
right,
you know, I don't think he did. I think it was a combination of a lot of different people. And I think the same is here. Not quite as many people in The Third Man, but I think it was probably there in the script. And I think Welles might have added a couple of phrases, perhaps a couple of more lines to it, changed a few words. I don't think he actually wrote it, which is what a lot of film lore will have you believe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Some of that Hollywood myth making.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, and I certainly don't buy that he directed any of it. I don't think any of it looks like a Welles film. It's not showy enough.
He famously only spent like a week on this picture, or is either a week in total or like a week in Vienna. But like, he didn't want to be in Vienna, so a lot of his stuff in Vienna, where we're looking at Lime's character and we don't see his face, is often it's stand-ins, and most of the time it's the director. Which is nuts to me. Like, what a damn diva! What a damn diva!
Well, the director is also the voiceover at the beginning.
Yes, which the producer in the American version cut out and had Cotten do the voiceover instead. So it's interesting that there are two versions. The American version was 11 minutes shorter, and then had that narration changed to Cotten's, and then they've now restored it, and it is Carol Reed's version now. I think widely, I think even in the States now, what you get is that version. I do want to ask you guys about Anna, the character of Anna. I love a good femme fatale, and I don't know if it's just because we've, you know, we're I don't know how many episodes into this podcast, and we've seen some really great femme fatales. I was really expecting more from her character. I I don't know what I was expecting. I was just sort of she just sort of sits there and pines over Lime to a degree that I just found a little bit unbelievable. And then in terms of what she contributes, because she's got an interesting opening. Like, she's there at the funeral, interesting. You're like, and you're intrigued. You go to the theater. She's an actor. You're like, okay, where's this gonna go? And then she just sort of pines the rest of the time and like doesn't ever go back to the theater. Like, doesn't she have a show like the next day? Does she ever like? What's going on with her her theatrical career? She just ditched it. What's going on? Yeah. What's your guys' take on Anna? I was left a little wanting with her.
I think she represents. It's kind of different because she's so buttoned up and from our viewpoint, perhaps she looks like the standard like all Bohemian European stand-up woman. But I think really if you were to cast that today, she would be kind of like seen as like a hipster, flighty, free spirit, who maybe has some charm and maturity, but ultimately is bad news. I understand the appeal because she's very pretty and she has like a certain seduction to her, but pretty much by the time you get halfway through this movie that she is not she is not as into him as he is into her. And this is not going to work out ultimately. And, I'm screaming the first time I watched this movie when he stops the car for her, because I'm getting stressed for him. Like, dude, you're going to miss your flight. And he's like, no, I got to talk to her. I'm like, she's not going to want to talk to you. I mean, if a 17-year-old hormonal boy can figure out like Anna's not into you, dude. Like, I think it's
isn't that Holly all over though?
Yes.
That's a really good point, and maybe also to kind of sidetrack onto a Holly discourse again. Also, elements that frustrate me is he never sees what's right in front of him. Particularly that scene when he first sees Lime, and then Lime goes running and into that square. And he's looking around the square like a dummy. Oh, I don't know where he's at. And the whole time I'm like, he's inside that little structure. Open the door to the structure. Open the door. That's where he is. And then it takes the police to the police come over. They walk up. They just walk straight to it and open the door. And they're like, oh, he must be down here. Like, yeah, of course he is. Come on. So I guess the problem that I have with Holly is that with certain characters, like if you think of like Holland March in The Nice Guys, who's kind of a goofball and messing up all the time, and it's part of his character, you don't ever get a sense that people are saying or that he is aware of how much he's messing up. Like to the point is, I don't know if the script realized it or the film realized it, and then we're watching this thinking he's messing up all the time, but I don't know if the story is aware how much its protagonist is effing up and like going nowhere with that sort of narrative. Hence why, it's also frustrating when he's trying to like be sweet on Anna and she's just like, no.
She's definitely not interested. She's definitely because she's only got eyes for Lime, and she makes that very clear. Even if it's perhaps more subtly put than at other times. Like at one point she says, I don't know anything other than that I wish I was dead or something, she says.
Yeah.
I think rather than being an overt femme fatale, I think that's what she is. I think she's the embodiment of that feeling after the war that things will never be the same again and can never go back to how they used to be. And she's feeling that, Vienna's feeling that. But she's feeling it because Harry Lime is dead. Whether you can believe it or not as a real human emotion, she literally has no other eyes than for him. So nobody else can come close. You have to question why.
Yeah.
You have to ask yourself why she feels like that, because he doesn't come across as some film noir villains are very charming, aren't they? And they're very attractive. Kirk Douglas in Out of the Past, for example, is a very attractive and alluring presence that you can imagine a young girl falling head over heels. I don't get that with Harry Lime. I get just a crook on the fiddle, really, who's as Trevor Howard's character says, who is destroying lives and doesn't really care, and he's just moving on to the next book. So where's the sort of light and shade in Harry Lime that makes you believe that Anna feels the way she does? Because it's such an absolute feeling, it's such an absolute emotion that she never wavers from it. Certainly not for Holly. But you don't get the impression that she's wavered for it from anybody else. From the minute she meets Harry, that's it. And I find that a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah, I do.
But I don't think she's necessarily, as a femme fatale, I think it's putting her in a, or treating her as a femme fatale, I think might be putting her in a false position. I don't think that's the role she's meant to serve.
Oh, no, she's not. She definitely doesn't serve the point of the femme fatale. It's just that she is there, and you're thinking this is film noir, so she must fall into that role in some way, whether they're going to subvert it or not. And they don't even do that. They don't even subvert it. She's literally just sort of. And I guess I don't like characters, particularly female characters, who just do nothing but pine over a guy. I'm like, have a little bit of agency, sweetheart. Come on, a little. Kathy Moffat in Out of the Past, fantastic. There's plenty of other femme fatales that have really strong agency and whatnot. And so I just kind of thought, give her something a little bit more. And I guess the only time that she sort of has it a little bit is at the end, which the end is interesting because there was a fallout with Reed and Green over the ending there. And it's very similar to Chinatown, where Robert Towne wanted a happy ending, and Green wanted a happy ending, but in the end, we didn't get a happy ending. He blatantly he wanted her to fall into his arms, and Reed is like, that's not. It's not going to happen. She keeps walking, and that kind of, solidifies his sort of, Holly's sort of, constant, I don't know, just inexperience and buffoonery, and
self-assurance again. He's absolutely certain she's going to go with it. He's absolutely convinced of it, and of course she doesn't. And that says more about him than it does about her, I think.
Yeah, it's also very similar to The American, the Henry James novel, and at the end of that book, Henry Newman thinks he's won. He thinks he's had his revenge on a family that hurt him and humiliated him. But then there's this other character over to the side who's like, you didn't do jack shit.
Yeah,
they don't care what you've done. And he's like, oh.
Well, I think Reed made the right call. It would have been a very forgettable movie. Does it not end that way? Because I think that ending justifies, it justifies how we feel about Holly and the whole situation and Harry and Lime. We know that he's not making the right decisions constantly. And to reward him at the end, just because he finally is the one who puts Harry Lime down, it would have been very hollow. And I think it would have made Anna, I know you're not a huge fan of her, but I think it wouldn't. I would think it would have made her a very bad character for her to suddenly be like, I'm just going to go with the guy who shot the guy I love. Like, I agree with Booth that there needs to be there does need to be a little bit more of why does Anna like this guy so much? Why does she like Harry Lime so much? He seems pretty repugnant, but but for whatever reason she does. And I think all people can relate to looking at someone who is like, you're so beautiful and so cool, and you are with this slug of a person, of all genders. I think we all have related to that. We're like, how in the world? And you're so in love with this person. But I also think kind of going to off what Booth said, this is the end of the fear of what was going to happen in World War II. I also think it's retelling the audience that everything that happened, all this suffering and all this stuff, it was kind of for nothing. Lime is dead. All the people he hurt, he didn't get any money. He didn't get rich off of it. He lived basically in squalor by the end of it. The city's still destroyed. Our protagonist is miserable. the woman he's into is miserable, and it's just like, well, all right, everyone, roll credits.
Yeah. And again, that's that's what the war did. So
Yes.
what was it all for in the end? What was it all for? I think there's a lot of that, and I definitely agree. Luke, very quickly, this is very much a Chinatown style ending, and for the same reasons, I think it's the right ending. That if they'd gone off arm in arm, it would have cheapened everything that had gone before. And it would have cheapened Anna's character if you just accept that she is in love with this crook. For her to make that decision to go with Holly would then just be like totally unintelligible and so out of character. It would have made no sense at all. So sometimes walking away arm in arm is not the answer. It wasn't in Chinatown, and it certainly isn't here.
Yeah, I mean, I think the kind of the example where they did do that and it was a bad call is the Big Sleep, Bogart and Bacall's Big Sleep. They tweaked the ending of the book, which is a very downbeat, sour ending, and in the movie they gave it this happy-go-lucky ending of like, oh, they're together now, they're happy, and like, it's ridiculous. So I'm always in favor. Noir never ends happily, and that's how noir needs to end. Is in an unhappy downbeat. It shouldn't end on a happy-go-lucky positive beat. I think that's just a staple of how that genre is operates. Whether that's Rick Deckard and Rachel together but fleeing. They're together, but the downbeat is they have to flee. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like there's danger still coming, and whatnot. So that's kind of So I do appreciate the ending of this movie. I'm glad that they kept it like that, because I'm way more in favor of that, and happy-go-lucky ending would have been silly. We do a rating system. We rate our films out of 1 out of 5 Falcons, 5 being the best, 1 being the worst. Matthew Robinson, we'll start with you. How many Falcons would you give The Third Man?
Okay, I'm biased. It's a lifelong favorite. I'm going to give it 5 out of 5 Falcons. And I will say really quick before everything wraps up here, if you didn't like Joseph Cotten, but you still want to kind of see how he plays out, there is a TV show that ran for 5 seasons of The Third Man, starring Michael Rennie. And it's different. You can watch the pilot on YouTube for free. There's like 70 episodes. But anyway, just throwing it out there. But 5 out of 5 Falcons.
Fantastic. Matthew Booth.
Well, I'm going to go and check out that pilot for a start. I'm going to give it a very solid 4.
Yeah, I think I'm the same. I'll give it. I was teetering between. Yeah, I'll give it a 4. I'll give it a 4 because there's a lot visually that's really great. There's a lot of little scenes that are really good. There's a lot of dialogue that's really good. There's some, like I said, there's narrative issues and some character issues, but I can see why at the time what it was doing that was new and innovative and quirky, that caught the appeal of so many people. I think I understand its place in history from that side. It's not the story side. So I think I'll give it a 4. I'll be generous and give this one a 4. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for joining us, Matthew.
Yes, thanks very much, Matthew.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. This is great. I love you guys. This is awesome. I'm going to be like binging even more of your episodes now because it's like this
Excellent.
is like
Thank
my
you.
jam.
Yes, and we'll bring you back on. We'll
have you back definitely.
Please do.
Future. There's plenty of noir to get through.
Well, that wraps up our investigation into The Third Man. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with another case. In the meantime, please remember to like and subscribe, and be sure to take care walking down those mean streets.